My name is Malka Singer. Before that was Malka Golub.
How do you spell that?
Golub. I came.
Where were you born first?
I was born in outside of Tel Aviv, on the outskirts of Tel Aviv.
What year?
Which 1925, when it was a British mandate. It was called Palestine at the time. All of that area was called Palestine.
Your parents were born
my parents, now my dad was born in Bialystok, which was sometimes Poland, sometimes Russia. My mother's family, which was a grandfather, grandmother, and 5 children, lived just outside of Lublin, Poland. They left, and I think my father left at about the same time from Bialystok, while they left from a town near Lublin just after the First World War. And they came to Israel.
Here's a question. Why did they leave Poland?
First of all, my father, well, Jews were not treated very well in Russia, or Poland for that matter. And I think at the time that my father left, it was part of Russia. And he did not want to serve in the Russian army because Jews were treated very badly then. And so he managed to get out.
Were Jews mandated to have to, how long did they have to serve in the army?
That I don't really know. But you know, there was constant wars between Poland and Russia. And if you remember, there was also a revolution in Russia around the 1914 area. Just exactly what kind of war was just before the First World War there, I'm not sure. But I know that he just left. My father, if left alone, he was a pretty young man. My grandfather, on the other hand...
You know anything about his family, his mother and father?
They all remained in Bialystok.
And do you know what occupation?
I don't know anything about the family. I know it was a large family, but I never met them.
You know, did he ever talk to you about his parents?
My father didn't say that much. And I just, as a child, I didn't ask him too many questions.
So when he came to Poland, what did he do?
He came to Palestine from Bialystok.
And what did he do as an occupation?
You know, at first I think he was like all the pioneers at the time, cleaning up roads, trying to guard different communities. I know he used to say that at night they rode on horses with guns, you know, protecting a community. And during the day they were clearing up rocks.
So this was 1918?
That was around 19, maybe 17.
He lived in a village?
Yeah, I guess he lived somewhere around Tel Aviv, and many little towns were there.
Why did they have to use a gun at night?
Pardon me?
Why did they need to ride around with guns at night?
Well, because the Arabs were constantly rioting. There were Arabs who actually in the middle of the night would go and just kill people. And to protect the community or the little communities, that they had guards that were around all night.
So they didn't have like a formal police department?
No, because it was a British mandate.
So they were.
And it was not really a country yet.
So because of the British mandate, you couldn't have your own police department?
I guess so.
And so you relied on the British to protect you?
We relied on the British to protect us, but they didn't. and that's where citizens of the community would usually be guards at night. They would take turns. Nobody got paid for it. They lived in the community and they tried to protect it.
So now your mother and her family
My grandfather, when they first came, they stayed around Tel Aviv. There was an area where newcomers stayed until they were getting their own parcel of land or whatever they wanted to do. My grandfather got a parcel of land. I don't know if he paid for it or if was given to him by the Jewish National Fund, but he had a piece of land. He had a orange grove on it. He had chickens. He had one cow. I remember that. And then on the side, he used to make shoes. He used to go up. There were in the community. They moved from that little community to the land that they were given, or bought. I'm not sure how they got the land, but they built a house out of wood, and they had all these animals and the orange grove, and he had a little shop that made shoes. He was a cobbler. You know, he made shoes from scratch.
Did he do that when he was in Poland?
I don't know. I don't know. I thought that he was pretty well off in Poland. Now what he did, I don't know. Because he had enough money to pick himself up and his wife and 5 kids.
So your grandfather and your grandmother came with
5 children.
And your mother was one of these 5 children?
Yeah.
And how was she the
She was one of the middle child. There was an older brother.
You know the names of your aunts and uncles?
Yeah, the older one name was Chaim. Then there was a sister Paula. Then was my mother, and her name was Tzipora, which is Fegele, they called her. And then was an uncle David, and then there was an aunt Zahava. So there were 5 children and my grandmother. When they were given the parcel of land, they built a wooden house. Now that house had 2 rooms. One was supposed to be the living room, one was the bedroom. Then they had a porch in the back. And part of the porch, a very small part of the porch, was the kitchen. Now, they had no electricity. They had no running water in the house. They had a well right in the back. And let's see, my grandmother had to cook on a 1-burner primus, they called it. It was just a 1-burner kerosene thing.
And this is about 19...
That was actually she still cooked with it when I was there, so...
when did they build the home?
They built a house, I think, a couple of years after they came.
So we're talking 1920?
Yeah, around 20, 21, something like that. And
so this is about 100 years ago?
Pardon me?
This is about 100 years ago this happened?
About that, I guess.
So,
200 years. No, 100 years, you're right. So they lived very frugally. You know, they got up with the sun and they went to bed when the sun went down, because there was a little bit of light. They used to use kerosene. In fact, I remember those kerosene lamps that they carried that had,
So what did your mother and her sisters and brothers do for formal education, schools?
Well, now, I think they had some education, because my mother wrote and read. So how much education actually they had, I'm not sure. I think they probably have elementary school education.
Was there a school in the community?
Um,
Was it the school they had in the community? Was it secular or was it religious?
no, it was a secular school. Now I don't, my mother got married at 17. So I don't remember if she went to school in that little town or whether she went to school when she was on the outskirts of Tel Aviv.
So your mother, how did your mother meet your father?
I don't know how my parents met. I really don't know how they met. But the community was a very small one. And I know all my uncles and aunts got married.
So your parents, when they got married, where did they live?
Okay, my parents, when my parents were married, my father was a very handy man. He built houses all by himself. When I was a little girl, actually, we lived in the same area that where my grandparents first came to. Because I remember as a small child, a very small child, I don't know how old I was, maybe 3 or 4, and my brother and I remember playing in a bucket of water. But that's all I remember from that area. Then we moved to Ramat HaSharon, where my grandparents lived. My dad went and built a house very close to my grandparents, but this time it was a cinder block house, and he brought water into the house, so we had a flushing toilet. I don't know if you remember the toilets that had a tank on the top and you had to pour the water. That's the kind of toilet we had. And we even had electricity for a very short time, and I think it must have been a generator because there's no electricity in the whole community.
And this is
he might have used a generator, and I think the light was only short periods.
So you were born in 1925.
25.
What was your father's name?
Pardon me?
Your father's name?
His name was Burl. That was his name.
Golub?
But actually, his name was Golumbovich.
Okay.
But he changed it when he came to the States. But what he did is cut it short.
So his name was Burl.
Burl was his name.
So.
But he called himself Ben here. So it's very confusing.
What did he do what was his job in Israel when he was married?
Well, what happened, he built this house, and while he was building the house, I don't remember if he did anything else. I remember I was a very small child. But soon after that, he sold that house. We stayed there only maybe a few years. He sold the house to my oldest uncle, my mother's brother. He bought the house for my dad, and we moved back to Tel Aviv, to the old section of Tel Aviv. Well, it was the only section. Everything else was getting built up. And my dad got a partner. He built a duplex house. He had a factory on the bottom, and on the top there were 2 residences, one for us and one for the partner. And what my father did, he was a very fine carpenter. He made cabinets, he made furniture, he got material for building, and that's what he did in the factory. In fact, that's what he did before he came here. Because he came here, actually times were pretty bad in 1936. The Depression was still sort of winding up, but the Arabs we had a big problem with them. There was a big, actually there were two of them. One was in 29, I was told, and one was in 36.
What problems can you describe?
The Arabs in the community, well, not all Arabs, because we had some very friendly neighbors who were Arabs. But evidently the Mufti of Jerusalem was a friend of Hitler. I don't know if you knew that. And he instigated a lot of the Arabs to kill the Jews, to get rid of them. And some of them did. Some of them actually, most of it, that's when Haganah was first started. The Haganah was an organization of people, of protecting people. There also the guys who were the Stern group, which was the left, I mean the right, very right group of people. They were a little more aggressive than Haganah, but both groups were there to protect the community from the Arabs who wanted to kill the Jews.
The Stern group, when you say right wing, what do you mean by that?
The Stern group, do you remember the Stern group?
When you say right wing, what do you mean by that?
They are, well, they're the ones, I think that the organization that Netanyahu is part of is sort of an offshoot from that.
What do you mean by right wing then?
Pardon me?
What do you mean by right wing then?
Well, they wanted Israel on both sides of the Jordan. That's one thing. They felt that, they weren't going to deal with any people who are fighting us. They were going to bite at them and do what they are doing, kill them. So there were these two groups.
And the Haganah?
The Haganah was...
Differentiate the Haganah and
the Haganah was really the organization that was more accepted at the time.
They're more willing to live with the Arabs? Is that what you mean?
No, they definitely were there to protect but they would not go out. See, what the other group did, evidently there was a community that the Arabs went in and slaughtered everybody at night. The Stern group was so angry, they went into an Arab community who may not have been responsible for it and kill all the people. Now Haganah didn't do that.
Okay. So now
they did not deal things like that.
So
they believed an eye for an eye, let's put it this way.
The Stern group.
Yeah.
Now when you were born in 1925.
I was born, yeah, my parents were married. My father, I think, was about 8 years older than my mom.
Okay.
She was 17 years old, and I was born when she was a little past 18.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I was born in 1925.
And what do you remember about your little age, your oldest memory?
I remember living in that community that I described where my grandparents lived when they first came. It was like prefab kind of houses. And then my father built a house in Ramat Sharon next to my grandfather. Then he built another house where he had his factory. And then my mother didn't want to live there anymore in that area because it was getting kind of shabby. She wanted to move a little further north because I had an aunt that my dad brought his sister over, and she lived a little further north in Tel Aviv. Was a newer section. My mother wanted to live there.
What was your aunt's name?
My aunt was Luba. And her husband had a tricot factory. He made sweaters and bathing suits and things, by knitting, knit stuff.
So when he came, that's what he started as a business.
My aunt?
Your uncle. Your uncle.
Well, I don't know when he came, but I know that my dad brought his sister over.
So you're a little child. What kind of things did you do with your family, your siblings? Did you go? Did you have?
We really didn't do anything. We all went to school. There were schools everywhere. My mother never worked. My dad made the living. And in 1936, times were bad. First because, as I explained, the Arabs were rioting. And so my dad had family here in America. He had two uncles that was his father's brothers, and he had one aunt that was his mother's sister. And they were all after him to come. So he figured, well, he cannot get material, times are bad, he might as well try. So what he did is, I think in 1937 is when he actually left. He went to Bialystok, he visited his family, and from there he came to America. The 1938 was the World's Fair on the island, I think, in Long Island.
39.
So he figured he'll come and see it. And if he likes, he may stay. The family prepared the proper kinds of papers for him. So he could stay and work here. And that's what he did.
Where did he emigrate to?
Pardon me?
Where did he live? And he came to the United States.
He lived in New York. I don't know exactly his. I think that his aunt Tante Pearl was their name. We called her Tante Pearl. They owned a lot of apartment houses in Lower Manhattan. And I think he might have stayed in one of them.
And what did he do then?
Well, I think he did carpentry work while he was here. But actually what happened was, I don't know if my dad actually planned to stay, but the war broke out. Germany marched into Poland in 1939, and that sort of changed things because they were also fighting the Germans in North Africa. The British fought the Germans in North Africa. And we were bombed, actually.
Tel Aviv.
I don't know if the German bombed us or Italians bombed us, but we were bombed, and we had air raids every single day. So when that happened, they all decided we better leave.
But this is 1939?
That was, well, the war started in 1939.
When were you bombed?
I think they started working with papers in 1940 for us. No, it had to be before, because we came here in 1941. No, we came here in 41.
41, okay.
We came here in 1941, so I think they might have started with the papers when Germany marched into Poland.
What do you remember about being bombed?
But being bombed?
Yeah.
I remember that the first bomb that fell on Tel Aviv was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when people were coming from work, and there were a lot of casualties. As again, I'm not sure whether they were the Germans who bombed or the Italians who did.
How long did the bombing last?
Not long, because remember, the British were there and they probably were chasing the planes. So it didn't last very long, but they managed to kill a lot of people.
Were there other bombings after that?
Oh, yes, there were a couple of more bombs, but there were a lot of air raids, more than bombs. And we all had to run to shelter.
What did you do when you, how did you react to the bombing?
No, you heard the sound of the horns or the sound of the warning, and we all just went to, I don't know, you know, I never did go into one, because what happened was, we were planning, now we were making arrangements to go to America, right? The papers were all done. We went to Jerusalem to the American embassy. We saw the American doctor. You know, we had to go through the doctors and different tests to make sure we are not bringing any diseases to this country. The people over here had to promise that we will never be on the government dole, which means welfare. Everything was prepared. We had even ship tickets. It was an American ship line. But what happened was, when it was our turn to board the ship and come, they stopped coming because the Germans mined the Mediterranean. So we had tickets in our hands and no ship.
So how did you get to the United States?
What?
How did you get to the United States?
Well, we found that Egypt was the only neutral country in the area. Egypt had one ship that always went across the Atlantic. It was called the Zamzam. So we were booked on that. And first of all, we gave our apartment up when we were going to go on the American ship.
Just stop you for 1 minute. So your father leaves in what year did he leave?
I think he left in 1930, must have been 37 or 38, no, 37, because he went to Bialystok to see his family. Then he came to America.
So for like 2 or 3 years,
he
your father
arrived
was
here.
away about 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, he arrived here around 1938.
But I mean, before you left, it was at least 2 years. 2 or 3 years before you left to go to the United States. So you were without your father for 3 years?
My father left around 37, and we didn't come here until 41.
All right, so for three or 4 years, you didn't see your father?
That's right.
And so how did your mother support you and your family?
Well, first my father sent money from here, and then my mother had to go get a job because it wasn't enough.
What did she do?
I don't really remember what she did.
So was that...
Oh, she worked in a store.
How difficult was it living without your father for those 3 or 4 years?
Pardon me?
How hard was it to live without your father for that period?
No, it certainly was not as good. I mean, we were a family, we stayed together. My father sent us money, my mom had to supplement it with a little bit more.
But he wasn't there.
But he wasn't there, right? So we had to take care of ourselves.
But emotionally, as far as, you know, the love and the camaraderie that your father was not giving you because he wasn't there.
Of course.
How did it make you? How did it think it affected you later on?
I don't think it really did. We kids, you know, did our own thing. I think it might have been more difficult on my mother than it was on our, because we all had friends. It didn't really change for us all that much, except missing our father, of course.
Did you get letters?
Oh yeah,
Right?
oh yeah. They wrote each other all the time.
People don't do that now, write letters. They email.
I know,
So how
but
was that letter?
I think he even called a couple of times.
Is that exciting to hear his voice?
Of course. So that's what happened.
So now your trip to getting
Now,
across the
let me
United
tell
States,
this trip.
Sure.
We find, okay, so we had the Zamzam, we had tickets on the Zamzam, and Zamzam went to America. On the way back, I guess deposited people. On the way back, the Germans sunk it. They said that they were carrying ammunition. Now the Zamzam is a neutral ship, right? For some reason, they said that they carried ammunition and they sunk the ship. So again, we have no ship. So what Egypt did, they took a transport ship. They only had these two ships, but that was a transport ship that never went any further than India. It wasn't a very large one. And converted it to passengers, because there were a lot of passengers who needed transportation. They converted it to a passenger ship to accommodate over 600 people. I'm not sure whether 600 passengers or 600 people total with the crew and all. And they made cabins that was just big enough to have bunks, 2 bunk beds. Our cabin was 2 bunk beds on one side and 2 bunk beds on the other, and just one person could walk in between. And at the end was a sink, so we can brush our teeth and wash our faces. But showers were out in the hallway and the toilets were out in the hallway. They just couldn't have big enough cabins to accommodate all these people. So that's what they did.
Did you have a balcony?
I got a what?
A balcony on your room.
That was something else. But it was, so anyway,
so
we finally...
your mother, your 2 brothers,
and myself.
And yourself.
The youngest brother.
How long did it take that trip? How long was that trip?
3 months. We were 3 months on the water. We took a train to the Suez Canal. We boarded that ship. The ship left that same evening because they said that they heard that they were going to bomb the canal or around the canal. They didn't want to be around, so they took off. It took 2 weeks to go from the Suez to Mombasa, Kenya. So we stopped in Mombasa to pick up some supplies, but the crew evidently had some work to do there, because we stayed over a week in Mombasa. We couldn't really travel all the way through because the Mau, I don't know if you were familiar with that, but there were 2 tribes that were fighting each other, and they both fought the British, so we were not allowed to leave the city. And we spent about over a week in that city of Mombasa. Then we took off. Took us 2 weeks to go to Cape Town. We arrived in Cape Town 2 weeks later. Again, we stopped in Cape Town to pick supplies, and the crew went on strike. So we ended up being in Cape Town for 9 days.
On the ship?
On the ship. Well, we didn't, we were allowed to leave. Mm-hmm. We can get off the ship and walk around.
You didn't stay in a hotel or anything?
No. We used the ship as a hotel. Mm-hmm. There were some people who did travel actually to Johannesburg, because they knew it was going to take a while before we get out. We couldn't do that. See, my middle brother, broke his leg just before we left. So he had a big cast on, and it was very difficult for him to move around.
What was his name?
His name was Mordechai in Hebrew, but here they called him Mari.
Okay. Now you're 16 now.
I was 16, and my brother was 13, the middle brother, and the little one was 6.
Okay.
60. There were 10 years different between myself and the youngest. And So we really couldn't go anywhere. So we just went out. This is the first time I was introduced to mangoes, the fruit. My mother went and bought a whole basket full of mangoes because the food on the ship was terrible. So at least we had some fruit. And then we left Cape Town, but this time we had to cross the Atlantic. It was awful. Everybody was sick. Now remember, it was August and into September already, and that's when hurricane season is. And we hit hurricanes. The ship went sideways completely. Water came into the dining room, dishes were broken, and everybody was sick. Everybody was on deck sleeping.
Anybody hurt on the ship?
I don't think so, not that I knew of. And it took 2 weeks to cross the Atlantic. And we ended up in Pernambuco, Brazil. Now, you know, it was very difficult in those days to get into the United States. And the ship actually emptied in Pernambuco. There were just a couple of families left on the ship. Everybody left in Brazil. And I discovered something I didn't really know, but there was a big and a really large group of Greeks who actually left. They must have left Greece before the Germans went in, went to Egypt, and from Egypt they went to Brazil. And I remember seeing guards, and they protect somebody. They did protect somebody. I didn't really know when we were on a ship that we had somebody important on that ship, but evidently we did. And they all left in Brazil. They couldn't come to the United States. So there were just us. I knew one family from Borough Park, Brooklyn, that I knew. And there was maybe another couple families that I wasn't really familiar with. And we left Brazil. We only stayed there while these people got off. They picked some supplies for us. And we took a couple of more weeks to get to Trinidad. And there too we had to stop and pick some more supplies. And from Trinidad we ended up in Hoboken, New Jersey. And you know, we couldn't disembark for a few days because we were at sea for 3 months. Doctors came up the ship to make sure we were all okay. And it took a few days before we could actually leave the ship. And then my father took us to an apartment.
So, let me just stop for a minute. So what do you remember when you left the ship and you finally got into the United States?
We were in the United States.
What were you thinking then?
Well, we didn't really think very much getting out of Hoboken because there was a taxi.
You didn't see the Statue of Liberty as you were coming into
No, we didn't. I didn't see the Statue of Liberty. I think the Statue of Liberty is a little further up.
So what do you remember about when you left the ship and now you're in the United States?
I don't really remember. I know we were very anxious to get off. My dad was there with the taxi.
And you hadn't seen your father in 3 or 4 years?
And the 4 of us.
And what was that like? The reaction of your mother, your brothers?
Oh my God, everybody was very happy to see each other, of course. And when we got on the taxi, and we went through the tunnel. I think it was Lincoln Tunnel. We went. And we were just, you know, amazed, because we didn't see anything like that up where we came from.
New York City.
Well, we went into New York and we went to the Lower East Side. I think apartments were very hard to get. And probably Tante Pearl's family got us an apartment on Rivington Street. really lower Manhattan. Push carts, and a lot of noise in the street, selling things right in the street. I don't know, did you ever go to New York?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's still the same way.
I don't think it is.
But there were push carts and people were selling outside the street and in the shops, and there was a lot of noise. And we had a second floor apartment. We were very disappointed.
Why?
Well, the apartment had one room that was a fairly good-sized room. Then there were two little rooms. They were bedrooms. Now the center room was everything. I remember there was a bathtub in that room, and we had a board over the bathtub, and there was a board over the bathtub, and during the day, my mother used it as a counter for cooking. Mm-hmm. By evening, she had to take the board off, and we took baths in it. It was really difficult living.
While other people are in the room, too, that take
Pardon me? While we hear all the noises outside.
But I mean, if you wanted to take a bath, where'd your brothers go? They stayed
I don't know. They had to go to their rooms. And I don't know if, the two rooms I think had doors. Mm-hmm. They had to close the door. Mm-hmm. So it was really a difficult living. My mother really didn't like it. So after 6 months, an apartment opened up in the Bronx where the two uncles lived. Okay. And that was really beautiful because it was a very quiet area. There was a park right across the road. Mm-hmm. The school was right there. The junior school was right there for me. And
now you came. Did you speak English when you came to the United States?
No, we had to take English, but we didn't really work at it somehow. I couldn't speak and I couldn't read anything in English.
So what happened to the school? What did you do there?
They first put me in, I forgot what class, but it might have been junior high, and I'm 16 years old. Mm-hmm. But then they moved me to high school.
But I mean, how long did it take you to master?
Well, I think it didn't take long. I think within a year I already spoke English. And I think within a year, they moved me up to high school.
Mm-hmm. But you were 17 then?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I actually graduated, I think, when I was 19, because actually 1 year later. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I definitely must have been 17. I don't even remember.
The children that you became friendly with, were they Jewish? Were they non-Jewish?
The schools in New York at the time were schools for the neighborhood. So in that school, it was James Monroe High, was half Jewish and half Italian. Mm-hmm. Because we were the Jews on one side, the Italians were on the other side, and we both went to the same school. Mm-hmm. So actually I never saw a black person. Mm-hmm. There was
So you had friends that were Jewish and Italian?
No, mostly friends with Jews. Mm-hmm. In fact, some of the friends from school and some of the friends from other schools. Because remember, at that point, I joined the Zionist organization.
What organization? What was it called?
It's called Hashomer Tzair.
And what was the purpose of the organization?
Well, it was a very lefty organization.
Meaning what?
They were Trotskyites.
Meaning?
Meaning that they were socialists.
Now, this organization, was this a political organization involving
Only
life?
Israel, not America.
It has nothing to do with America.
Nothing to do with
So
America.
what was the idea behind the organization?
Was
as far
to
as
go
Israel?
back to Israel, right. It was not a socialist organization in America.
So the goal was to go
It
back
was
to
just
Israel.
an organization to go back to Israel.
And then what, when you would go back?
And then you have a kibbutz. You go to a kibbutz. And actually that kibbutz happens to be right on the border of the Golan Heights, near the Golan Heights.
Well, what's the name of the kibbutz?
Sasa is the name of the kibbutz.
Still in existence?
They were all Americans to start with, and some Americans came back to America. Others left the kibbutz but stayed in Israel, and some remained.
Did you have friends that did that?
Oh yeah. In fact, when we were in Israel, Karen and I, about 8 years ago, we did go to Sasa. Unfortunately, we came on a Shabbat, Saturday, and didn't see anybody. But I was told by a friend who was there and came back that there weren't too many left. Some of them passed away, some of them left, so that I may not really see too many people that I knew.
So you came to the United States, you were 16, 17 years old, 18 years old at this point in your life. What was the motivation did you think about staying in the United States, or your goal was to go back to
Actually, at
Israel?
that point, we both, Al and I, were thinking of going back
But
to...
you hadn't met Albert at this point.
Yeah,
You're, let's say, 18,
Be-
19. When did you meet Albert? How old were you?
we were married. I was married at 23.
Well, did you know Albert when you were 18 in high school?
No, Albert was in Camden,
You're
and I
high-
was in New
You're in
York.
high school in your life, and you're thinking about going back to Israel?
Right.
There was no thought about finding someone and making a family in the United States?
No.
Why
All
was that?
those friends that I went with were going to go to
Were they
Israel.
all
In
these
fact, many of them were on the Exodus. Many of our friends happened to go on the Exodus to help, bring refugees into Israel.
That
I
was
don't
in
know, do you know the story of the Exodus?
1948, is that when you were talking about?
That was, oh good, what, I don't remember what age. No, 48 is when Al and I got married. Could have been 47.
But
I have to ask Al.
But as someone that's in high school, are all these friends, most of them immigrants as well? Had any of these friends had been born in the United States that wanted to go to
Oh, they
Israel?
were all born in the United States.
So you were like one of the few,
I was really one that wasn't, and my friend Leah was not. She was born in Austria.
These American-born children
Right.
are thinking about immigrating to
To
Israel.
Israel.
In 1941, 42, 43.
Exactly. To go into a kibbutz.
Why? What was the motivation for them to do that?
Well, Israel, well, it wasn't Israel yet,
Right,
but we all wanted it to become Israel. We wanted it to be a nation of people, of Jewish people, And that was, I think, the motivation of going back, to help build the country, to go into a kibbutz, create whatever you needed to create for the benefit of everybody.
Was there any concern about, was any of the motivation because of news of what was happening in Europe as far as Jews being interned or murdered?
We heard rumors here. In Israel, they knew exactly what was happening. They tried, those people who tried to come by boat, The British were there in the sea trying to stop, but there was always some that managed to make it. And those that didn't manage to make it ended up in Cyprus.
But this is after the war.
That was during the war.
During the war as well.
That was during the war, yeah. And the exodus was during the war too. You know, some Jews in Europe who had money and were able to get ships, to get on a ship to try and leave. And most of them tried to get to Israel. Of course, the British stopped them.
Your brothers, what did they do as far as school?
Pardon me?
Your brothers, did they have an interest in going back to Israel as you did?
No, not really. My brother Maury, actually what happened, when he was in high school, he's a smart guy, but he decided he can do and make more money if he doesn't go to college. So he quit. He had a half a year to finish, because in New York, you know, you can graduate in January and you could graduate in June. So there were, you could graduate at a time. So he had a half a year to graduate high school. And he gave my parents a very hard time, because they tried to talk him out of it, and he said, no, he can make money. He doesn't need to go to school. Well, they finally gave in because they just couldn't take it anymore. There was fighting in the house. So he did. He quit school and he tried to find a job. Now, I think the only job that he could get is the kind he didn't want to do. So he came back and asked if we would take him back to school again. And he finished college and he went to City College. He became a civil engineer. But he joined the ROTC in order to go, because my parents at that point didn't trust that he would continue at school. And so he just joined the ROTC, and he went and he studied civil engineering. And of course the Korean War was on, and he ended up in Korea as a civil engineer.
Do you know when he went to Korea, what year it was?
Oh my God, when was Korea? I forgot the years.
1950, 51, 52?
I know he was there for 2 years.
Was he there during the actual war or after
Oh
the war?
yeah, oh yeah, he was there during the war. Let's see, we lived in Hopewell, so that was, let me see, a year after Al graduated. He graduated school in 53, might have been 54.
So after you graduated high school, you're 19, what did you do then?
I did? Well, I studied education. So early education, nursery school. And there was a school in New York that was called the Bankscott. It was only a 2-year school, but it was an education school, primary education. I went there. I graduated.
What was it called?
The Bank Street School.
Okay.
It was on, I guess the name of the street was Bank Street. And I also studied at a school called Herzliya, which was a Hebrew education school, so that you can teach Hebrew if you so desire to do. So for a while, I worked at the Mayor's Committee nursery schools in New York. And then I left that and went to the Achshara, which is the training farm.
For what?
Remember I told you that I went to a training farm. That training farm was teaching us different modes of farming. I took care of 6,000 laying birds, no, 3,000 laying birds and 3,000 young birds, pullets. And I went to Rutgers to study poultry, and I did that at the training farm. I also milked cows by hand, and actually started doing that by hand before we got the machines.
Mm-hmm. And the purpose of all this training was to do?
To go back to Israel. We still are talking about going back to Israel. Mm-hmm. But then, as I said, I met Al.
When did you meet Albert?
When did I?
When and what was the circumstance when you met Albert? How did you meet Albert? And when was that? When did you meet your husband?
Oh, okay. Actually, I already left the farm, mm-hmm. and I went to Philadelphia. I don't know why I went to Philly. I guess I wanted to try another city. I left in Philly, and I actually rented a house with 3 other women.
Where was that?
And all of them were members of the organization.
Where was that?
On 7th Street, South 7th Street.
Okay.
And I got a job in a Hebrew school.
Where? What was it called?
Oh, God, I don't remember the name of the
synagogue,
school.
Hebrew school?
You know what? I can't even remember the name. I know that we lived on 7th Street, mm-hmm. and there was one synagogue that I taught Hebrew at, but I don't remember anything about the synagogue.
Okay, so
that's what I did.
While you were in Philadelphia, how did you meet?
And that's when I met Al.
How did you meet him?
I think Al's friend from Camden, the Sorofs. Are you familiar with the Sorofs? He was a Hebrew school principal, his father, and he went to medical school while the war was on, mm-hmm. so he never served. But when Al came back, I mean, they were friends before, from what I understand. The families knew each other.
When Albert came back from where?
From the war, mm-hmm. from South Pacific.
Where did he serve in the South Pacific?
He was in a hospital. He was a hospital corpsman, and he was in a hospital. That you have to ask him.
Right.
Because he was in one of the hospitals that accepted casualties from the different wars, I guess. I'm not sure. The South Pacific.
He lived in Camden.
When he came back, he went back to Camden, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess we met through Sarof.
Was he going to veterinary school at this point, or was he going to college?
I don't remember whether he was still in medical school or whether he was finished.
Veterinary school?
Yeah, medical school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you met, and you remember your first date?
I really don't.
No, you remember where did you go?
Where did we go? Well, I stayed in Philadelphia.
So he came to Philadelphia to meet you.
And he would come. Yeah, he came to Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. But I don't actually remember the very first time I met him. Actually, I'll tell you, I met him, but he didn't remember me from that.
Okay.
There was a camp, I think somewhere around Baltimore area.
Heightstown?
Baltimore, Maryland.
Heightstown?
Not in Heightstown.
Okay.
There was a camp.
Okay.
A children's camp.
Okay.
And they were at the camp. I was there, and there was other friends of mine were. I couldn't go when they did because I had a wedding to attend to. Mm-hmm. And I came alone. Thinking of it, I thought how stupid I was. I came alone, and I came on a train, And I was asking questions as far as where it is or can I get a taxi to get there. And there was one person, a man, who said, "Oh, I know where it is, I'll take you there." You know, I went with him. I didn't know the person, but he was evidently honest, and he brought me to that camp.
Right.
But thinking now, you couldn't do that today anymore. But I did it then. And I think I saw Al for the first time there, because even friends of mine were there, you know, from New York. And I remember Al was there. He doesn't remember.
He remembers.
I don't know if he doesn't remember being in that camp or whether he doesn't remember seeing me, but I remember seeing him.
So then, how long ago after that did you meet
But
him?
I met him, I think, in Philadelphia. Because I was in Philly then. I wasn't in Philly well, actually I was in Philly for a long time, because I got married after I met him. I think I must have met him, it must have been a year that I married him. And he went, and he still wanted to be a veterinarian. And you know, when he came back from, I don't know if he ever told you that, but when we came to Philadelphia, when we came back from the war, when they all came back from the war, they had the GI Bill, and many people wanted to become veterinarians. But there were only very few schools in the country. I don't know if there were 10 schools here. University of Pennsylvania was one, and Cornell was the other one. And I think I'll apply to everyone in the country. The only one who replied to him was Tuskegee University in Tuskegee, Alabama. Now, in those days, when you make an application, you had to write whether you're white or black. You had to put a W or B. He put a W. Evidently, they didn't notice it. And we got married, and we bought a used car, and we traveled down to Alabama.
Yeah,
It was an Oldsmobile coupe. I remember that car, because we had to push it all the way down and all the way up. And I think the first night we couldn't get into the school. We rented a room in some place in Tuskegee. That woman was so disgusting. I mean, she kept saying, "Oh, you're from the north. How terrible is the north." You know, they start cutting all blacks. Can you imagine there are blacks policemen up north? I mean, and it was segregated, the whole place. We went to a movie. We couldn't go with where everybody was. We had to go with the whites. The blacks went somewhere else. It was not very comfortable. But anyway, it was the first night, and I couldn't wait to get out of there. And we got to the university, and Al goes to register, and they look at him, and they say, "Are you white?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you can't be here. You can't be in the school. There is a segregation here, don't you know? We cannot accept white students. Or the government will stop, you know, giving us money that they all gave to the schools." What does he say?
I don't know.
But anyway, we stayed there for a period of time. I don't remember whether it was 1 week or 2 weeks, right at the school.
Why did you
and
stay
they
there?
tried to see, I mean, they realized they made a mistake when they looked at the papers and saw that he has a W there. They tried to see if they can get him into another school, another white school. The only one I think who agreed to see us see, Al, was a school in Georgia. I forgot what the name of the school is. Auburn, maybe. Is that in Georgia?
Well, that's in Alabama too, Auburn.
Okay, there was another school there. And Al stopped in there. Of course, they interviewed him, but they did not accept him. So we had to track back to Philadelphia. Now, we didn't live in Philadelphia at the time. I think we lived in Camden. I think we had an apartment in Camden. The reason why I couldn't go to University of Pennsylvania, even though he had his undergraduate there, is he thinks it's because he only had the 2 years, he should have had another year, but I think it was because there were so many applicants. They were only accepting 55 students, and they only decided to take students from their own state. All the ones that he applied to told him that they can't supply enough space for their own students, you know, their own state people. So the second year, I think I used what's his name, Sam's address,
His brother.
and he was accepted in school.
Then he got accepted.
He was accepted. Because then he was a Pennsylvania resident. And he was accepted, and then we stayed in Philadelphia for the next 4 years. So
For how long? Next
I
4
think,
years.
well, he also used the year that he couldn't get into school. He took another year at the University of Pennsylvania. Of undergraduate, and then he had 3 years at his, you know, and he was able to go into veterinary school.
Just getting back, what do you remember about your wedding?
The wedding?
Your wedding. Where was your wedding?
Well, first of all, we really didn't want to have a big wedding. We just wanted to sign a ketubah, a contract, and that was it. But my parents, they definitely, you have to have something. So we decided it was only friends and only family and very close friends. So my parents, I think, on 2nd Avenue, they got a place. First of all, they found an Orthodox rabbi, because that's all my parents knew.
This is in New York.
In New York,
Okay.
yeah. An Orthodox rabbi who married us. So I had, I think, the grandparents, Al's parents were there, my parents were there, Sam was there, your father was there, all the brothers. I don't know if Joe was there, I can't remember, but I think he probably was. And my brothers, and I think a couple of our friends. And in fact, that one friend who used to play around with cameras decided that he was going to take the pictures of the wedding. And he did. He took pictures, but his girlfriend opened the exposed all the films, so we really don't have any.
No pictures of your wedding.
What?
No pictures of your wedding.
No pictures of the wedding, but they did take pictures. And then we went to one of the restaurants on 2nd Avenue in Manhattan, and we had dinner. That's all. There wasn't really many people, because we really didn't want any. You know, we were still chalutzim, we were still pioneers.
So at this point, you both were thinking going
We
to
were
Israel?
still thinking of going to, yeah.
All during his veterinary school, he was thinking about going to Israel?
I think we did. I think I wanted to go. In fact, I think he made inquiries. and I don't think he received an answer. I think he wrote, that you have to really ask him, but I think he did write to somebody. He didn't necessarily wanted to go to the kibbutz, but he wanted to go to Israel, and they thought that they could use a veterinarian. And he wrote someone, and from what I recall, they did not return they did not answer. And so he continued practicing here. He got a job with a small animal on Bergen County in New Jersey, but just for the summer. The guy left for Europe all summer, and he had just gotten out of school, and he was running the practice. And then he got a job in Hopewell, New Jersey, working for a veterinarian who did mostly large animals. And then after that, we went to look for our own.
And why did he pick, was it Morristown?
Morris County, yeah. Well, we actually looked in the area of Hightstown, but I think further west, further inland. And it was, I don't know, for some reason we didn't care for the area. And so then Al said, well, he really would like to go a little further north. And so we went to Morris and Burnett County area. And that's where we finally settled.
Did he open his own practice?
Yeah, we bought, see, I worked all the time, and we managed to save a little money, and we bought a house right on the highway on Route 10. It used to be a real estate office, and we converted, my dad came and converted that from...
Your father the builder, right?
Yeah, my father the builder converted that building into a hospital. The garage became a kennel. You know, a lot of the patients were there. Then he made an operating room, a visiting room. Actually, the operating room, where the receptionist room was made. So my dad did it.
And how long did you have that facility?
Oh, that's where we had the practice until he retired. Yeah, actually we built it from scratch. You know, I had to go to work to put bread and butter on the table for a while.
But you were working though anyhow.
Pardon me?
What was your job that you were doing?
Okay, when remember I told you I taught Hebrew, right? So when we first opened the practice, when Al opened the practice, and maybe one or two people came, it's not enough to eat. And we had Sandy then. I think Sandy was about 2 or 3 years old. I was teaching Hebrew at the Dover Jewish Center. I think it was about 3 times a week in the afternoon after school.
You couldn't make a lot of money doing that.
Enough to put food on the table. That's about it. So that's what we did. So
looking back, you've been to Israel many times?
I wish more times, but Al and I went for the first time in 1966. And I know there was talk about another war. And you remember, because Egypt was moving the army closer to the border. They closed the canal, the Suez Canal, to any of the Israeli ships. They were really starting to carry, and so did Syria and Lebanon, and not Lebanon, Syria and
Egypt?
no, Syria, Egypt, and oh God, what's the name of the country? Right next to us.
Lebanon? No.
Not Lebanon.
Jordan.
What?
Jordan.
Jordan, that's the one I couldn't think of. And they were all rumbling, and we knew there was going to be another war. And this was the 6-day war, because they saw all the thing coming. I mean, the first thing Israel did is destroy Egypt's planes. And once the planes were gone, it was a land war. And they practically went into Egypt. And the same thing with Syria. They fought very hard. That's why the Golan Heights is so important, because they can stand up on the hill and shoot down to where people live. So you noticed that President Trump allowed the Golan Heights to become part of Israel. So that's.
Well, you're in the United States when the war started.
The United States was neutral, in fact.
But you were in the United States when this happened.
Yes.
Okay. What was your reaction? What were your concerns when this?
Oh, I was very worried. I was very worried. I mean, it was a new country. There were not that many people in there, even though some German Jews came after I left, and even during while I was there, they were coming. But compared to what Egypt had, or Jordan has, or Syria has, and they were all going in it, you know, at one time. That was harrowing.
Well, hold on a second. What is that? Telephone?
It's probably in my pocketbook. Ignore it.
I'm going to wait till it stops for a minute. Just so you can pick it up.
Yeah, I don't think, every now and then I get a call from somebody else. Only the children know my phone number.
And me.
And you.
So you don't get any scam calls?
What's that?
Don't you get scam calls?
A lot. That's why we don't very... Oh, I tell you about a scam thing I got the other...
What was that?
A couple of years back. It will stop.
Okay. So we're going to say, so you were concerned about so many, the population, the armies of the other countries being much bigger than Israel.
Oh my God, yes. But Israel managed to do okay.
Did you?
The only time Israel was caught off guard is 1973, Yom Kippur War.
When you went back, have you ever gone back to where you were born, where you lived?
You know, when we were there the first time, Al and I, my friend, because I had a friend there, said to me, "Do you want to see the house your father built?" Oh, I didn't tell you that. But my father built a house. You see, we had an apartment on Basil Street. Remember I told you we moved further north.
On top of the factory.
Not in a factory, further north.
Okay.
We had an apartment, and about 2 or 3 streets away, my father built a house again. You know, he was building all the time. He built our house. It had a gable roof, and it was completely modern of that day. I mean, we had a kitchen, we had a living room, we had a dining room. It was a nice house, and we were ready to move in. It was complete when he went to America. So we never moved into that house.
What did you do with the house?
He sold it. So my friend said to me, "Do you want to see the house your father built?" I said, "Yeah." She said to me, you won't recognize it because the people who bought it built 2 more floors on top of it. So it became an apartment house. She said, I'll never recognize it.
So you went and saw that.
I saw it, but I
What
didn't.
about, did you visit any of the places where you lived?
Where I lived before, while my dad was building that house,
Yeah.
we lived in an apartment on the street called Basel, which was a short street because right behind it was an orange grove, and behind the orange grove was an Arab village. And we kids used to go up to the Arab village. We used to play. There was one young, they married very young kids. And this one opened the gate she had, and we went in and we spent time with her, talked. She didn't speak Hebrew and we didn't speak Arabic, but we did play together.
When you were children?
When we were children. And then one time she told us not to come because she heard that there were some people from some other place were coming and they were trying to make trouble. So we didn't go there for a while, and then we did, and everything was okay. I don't know if the people came or not.
Did you ever make any contact with any of the children that you knew when you were living in Israel? Because you left when you were 16. Those people?
The only one I actually kept, see, I had lots of friends, but the only one that I actually kept in touch with is Margalit, is one that we used to live across the street from them, and then, I didn't tell you, but we had the 3 times that we were canceled before we were able to get onto the ship. First with the American ship not going on the Mediterranean. The second one was the Zamzam.
Right.
And each time we gave up an apartment. And then once we were waiting for the 3rd ship, the one that we finally ended up on, we couldn't get an apartment. So her family gave us a room, the living room. They had a living room in the front, and all 4 of us stayed in that one room. My mother cooked in her kitchen.
How long did you live there?
But I don't remember just how long, but as long as it took for the ship to become a passenger ship. Maybe a few months.
In one room?
I don't remember how many months. It wasn't a year, it was less than a year.
Did you've been to Israel more than one time?
Yeah, well, we went the first time, then I went with my mother. I went with my mother, and then...
What was it, going back with your mother, what do you remember how your mother, what was her reaction to different things that she saw, the people, the places?
Well, actually, when I went with my mother, we stayed in a hotel. We stayed in the Hilton. I was a travel agent. After I was teaching, then I had raised a family. I didn't want to go back to teaching, and decided to become a travel agent. I was travel agent for 15 years almost. And while I was a travel agent, I managed to get good deals in hotels and stuff. So we stayed at the Hilton in Tel Aviv, but we spent most of our time in Ramat Sharon because that's where her sisters lived. And nieces lived. The whole family was in Ramat Sharon. The grandparents already passed away when we went. My mother did go once before on her own. She went by ship. to visit her family. But when I went with my mother, we stayed in a hotel, and then we spent most of the day in Ramat
But, I mean, what was an experience being in Israel? You had left with your mother many years before. You were both came back. You know, you're at this point you must have been 50 years old. You had a family, you had children.
Oh yeah, I had children.
And she was, you know,
My mother
older
was,
now.
remember, only 18 years older than I am.
So like an older sister now. It's like your older sister. You're.
That's right. She
Yeah.
was my older sister.
But I mean, she immigrated there. You were born there, and you both basically started your lives there. So, you know, did you visit places, schools? Did you reminisce? Did she show you places
You
where
know,
you maybe
Israel
did this?
changes so much every time you go there. We wouldn't recognize the place. There was no place we can go visit because it was gone or expanded or built on. I mean, it's just unbelievable. In fact, the last time Karen and I were, somebody said to me, "Do you want to see where your grandparents lived?" And I said, "Yes." Because to me as a child, it was a long walk to school or a long walk to go to synagogue. Because I went with my grandfather on Shabbat. He went to shul and I guess I stayed there. And I said yes. I wanted to know how far it really was. We couldn't find it. And these are children who have lived there all along. People who never left the town couldn't find where my grandfather's house was. Because more buildings came, they destroyed that, the old wooden house, and big apartment houses were built.
And the synagogue, same thing?
The hill where the synagogue and the city hall and was still there. It was still in the same place. Just built up, bigger. But so you could see where the hill was. See, just imagine there was a small hill right in the middle. Grandfather was on one side. Two aunts lived on this side of the hill.
Oh.
You see, so we all had to go to the center. And I just could not find where she couldn't find the place. She couldn't be sure where it was. That's how it completely, I mean, Ramat Sharon used to be, when I was there, not too many families lived there. It was a very small community. Now it's a big, suburb of Tel Aviv.
It's
with all the roads.
It's March 2017. The news is that yesterday a rocket was fired from Gaza, blew a house up in Tel Aviv.
Right, that was yesterday.
They are
day before.
talks of bringing some of the reserves to active duty in Israel for a possible.
They showed
encouragement.
pictures of the house.
So as someone who was born in Israel, who wanted to live in Israel all your life, who has Israel in your heart, what do you feel now?
You know what I feel? It's really, I have no patience for these people in Gaza. I really don't. No matter what, first of all, you have to remember that Gaza was given to them. Israel controlled it, gave it to them with hot houses, farms, something they could take up and grow themselves and be more independent. What they did is destroy all of that, build more what do you call it, stations to shoot rockets to
Bunkers.
Israel.
Bunkers. Yeah.
I mean, I have no patience for them. They really don't want to improve themselves. They just want what somebody else has. And I've just had enough. I keep saying, it's really, to be honest with you, it's a hellhole. Because they have no way. Egypt has a blockade, Israel has a blockade. They can't go into the sea, they can't go anywhere. They are stuck in that place. And only because they are what they are. So, what do you do with them?
I don't know.
What do you do with them?
All right.